My friend Sasha, yeah, I'm here with my friend Sasha Uzunov, uh, freelance journalist and Macedonian activist, I'd have to say, because his education, his contribution to our education has been, in my opinion, second to none. So we're going to have a little chat today, nothing really prepared. But Sasha, remember that saying that during the Roman Empire that all roads lead to Rome?
Absolutely, yes.
Is that what's been the case for the past, say, post 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union? Would you say that all roads led to Washington? It
Absolutely.
pulled all the strings?
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose Washington's, European HQ, which is Brussels, the NATO, the European Union. But yes, definitely all roads lead to Washington in that unipolar moment when the Cold War ended and communism collapsed and the Soviet Union was no more, and the US became the sole superpower.
But it seems to be changing recently, huh? I never thought I'd see such a challenge mounted against the, shall we say, the Anglo-American NATO world, both economically through BRICS, but also with Putin standing up, I guess, to them and through his special military operation in Ukraine.
Well, look, I think this sort of showdown was brewing for some time. I mean, I think it was inevitable. Russian and American interests don't coincide. They don't gel. And sooner or later, you'd have sort of two, tectonic plates or forces rubbing against each other, creating enormous friction. And to add to the mix, you've got China. China, since it got rid of the Cultural Revolution with the demise of Mao in the mid-70s, and sort of became a sort of communist capitalist state, has become an economic superpower. And so, American interests, especially in the Asia Pacific region, don't necessarily align with those of China.
That's a good analysis, but I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Why don't they align? Is it because there's a natural competition between them, or is it because there's one hegemon who wants to continue the domination, is not prepared to, shall we say, share the world or cooperate? Because, one sec, bro. I heard that Putin actually asked to join NATO. And the Chinese are always saying we need a win-win situation, not a colonial ripoff, but a new model of interacting internationally. And I think that's probably what's rubbing America up the wrong way. They want things like they've had them. What do you reckon?
Well, look, to a large extent, what you're saying is spot on. I mean, China has only become a superpower in the last 20 odd years. I mean, you have to look at European and Asian history. I mean, China for long periods of up until the late 19th century, earlier 20th century, until sort of China sort of got its act together, was under foreign domination. I mean, you had the Germans, you had British, you had Americans, you had French, you had Italians, you had even Japanese having concessions within the Chinese empire. If I remember correctly, the Chinese referred to this period as the Great Humiliation. When
the century of humiliation.
Correct. I mean, this is the era when China lost territory like Hong Kong to the British over the Opium Wars. Control.
And Manchuria for a long time, Manchuria to the Japanese and so on.
Correct. Yes. And so,
So,
the US became a superpower after World War II when the British Empire handed the baton to the US. I mean, being its rebellious offspring, which reconciled with its parent. But the point being is that the British Empire basically ended in 1956 during the Suez Crisis, when the British tried to reimpose their domination of the world, which they ran before World War II. They wanted to take over the Suez Canal from Egypt, and from Egypt's president Nasser, and this is where the US stepped in, and Eisenhower basically read Britain the Riot Act and said, look, you need to withdraw uh, from the war with Egypt in 1956 over control of the Suez crisis, or else we will bankrupt you. And Britain had no choice other than to obey what the US told it to, and it's now become an adjunct, a proxy of the US. I mean, Britain is no longer Britain. Britain is the way I sort of classify Britain is a kind of fashion label owned by the US, like like
with this
Fanta
hint
is
of
owned by.
royalty and history and shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Fanta, which is owned by Coca-Cola. I mean, the main brand is Coca-Cola, but it has other brands, different brands owned
Mm.
by the same company, Fanta, Sprite, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the analogy I like to use when describing Britain. So Britain is no longer Britain. I mean, the US pulls the strings. I mean, it runs the European Union. It obviously runs NATO. And so China becoming a world superpower is a recent phenomenon. And as you mentioned earlier on, the US has been used to being the unipolar superpower with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Well, the Berlin Wall
yeah,
fell in
yeah.
'89. The Soviet Union was dissolved in 1991.
Um, and the other thing that the USA has been using to grow its wealth and to control the world is its use of the dollar as the de facto world currency. Now that must be a real boost to their power economically. The fact that they just can continue printing money while they're broke at the same time, yet their money is still good. It's it's like a bizarro world, in my opinion. You'd think that a country that was totally broke, their credit would be no good, their currency would be no good, but it's still the dominant one. However, it appears that, according to better pundits than myself, that at the next Kazan meeting, they
Mm.
will be introducing a new world currency, which they will use amongst themselves based on gold. How do you think that will impact on America, both economically and its
Well,
military
look,
might?
I think there will be a lot of friction. I mean, it's why it's why the US is talking up a potential conflict with China in the Asia Pacific region, and why it's dragging Australia into it. I mean, look, there's absolutely no basis for a war between the US and China. I mean, both have nuclear weapons. Both will destroy each other. I mean, no one will win, mate. I
Mm.
can't understand the logic of some US and pro-US pundits, both here in Australia and in other parts, including the US and in the Balkans of all places. Buying into this sort of potential conflict that's being talked up by the US. I mean, we've had a former Australian Prime Minister, Paul Keating, who's condemned this warmongering fever that's been spreading in Australia, and building and building up, and I don't see anything good coming out of this, obsession with painting China as the
Evil enemy.
devil. And there's a number of contradictory strands with Australian policy anyway, because on the one hand we have Australian politicians, or not all but some, who like to lecture us about anti-colonialism. I mean, they'll talk about being reconciling with Indigenous Australians. I mean, which is quite appropriate. Long overdue. There's
Yeah.
no disagreement with me over that. In coming to terms with Australia's British colonial past. I mean, again, I see nothing wrong in examining it. And hearing and embracing the Indigenous Australian side of history. Again, nothing wrong in telling history, dealing with the facts, and letting people then decide, reaching their own conclusions. But getting back to my original point, there's a contradiction in the sense that, on the one hand, we lectured about anti-colonialism and Indigenous Australians are the original owners of Australia, but we're being talked into a war with China, which is populated by Chinese people who are indigenous to China. So it makes no sense. I mean, it's a bizarre contradiction. On the one hand, Australia's big on Indigenous Australians, but it's aligning itself with the US, which is founded on colonialism. I mean, the US has got long-standing colonial issues with Native Americans and African Americans that it still hasn't resolved. So that to me is one of the sort of salient points coming out of Australia's domestic and foreign policy and its alignment with the US. It contradicts its claim to embrace and reconcile with Indigenous Australians.
Yeah, that's true. One of the things, Sasha, just on a little tangent here, that America becomes the hegemon really post-World War II.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they take it upon themselves to then assume that they won the war, they're the most powerful country, they're the exceptional people, and so on. But really, the reality is they were the last man standing in a world that was ravaged by war. All of Europe was destroyed. Russia was destroyed. The colonial world was destroyed. So their claim to having done it because of their values, in my opinion, doesn't fit the historical record. Because since China's competition, they are starting to seem not as powerful where it really counts economically. Their industrial base has been eroded. Now, they may still be, I'm not good at this, I don't know, but they still apparently lead the world in computer technology and such. But how long will that be, given the education system over there is failing? And a lot of the intellectuals are immigrants to America who won't necessarily need to come, or don't even need to come now, from places like China. So where is America going is my question, bro.
Well, look, mate, that's a great question. I mean, many people are posing that exact same question. It's hard to know. I mean, look, quite a few people have sort of predicted America's downfall, and it hasn't transpired. I mean, look, I think America is still a powerful country. There's some good to it, and there's some bad things about it. But at some point, it's got to overcome this addiction in wanting to sort of dominate everyone, and also
Yes. Well put.
resorting to war. I mean, if things don't go America's way, there are two paths that the elites take. It's usually fierce economic, brutal economic sanctions, or it's some kind of war. Whether it be a counterinsurgency or a proxy war or whatever.
Or an invasion if need be, which they have done.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
We saw Iraq in 2003. Yeah.
And like you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily have to be them. It can be their proxies that are fighting for them.
Correct.
Now,
Yes.
that's probably one reason why the Ukrainian war isn't as big an issue in places like America. If they had thousands of Americans killed, apparently they're saying it's over 500, maybe 600,000 dead Ukrainians. That's more than what America lost nearly in the war, or close to, in the Second World War. So I think they're having their cake and eating it too, in a way. You know what I'm trying to do, man? They're trying to control without taking casualties. But
Absolutely.
I don't think they'll be able to continue along that path. I don't know how long other people in the rest of the world are going to say, oh, yeah, that's the way to go. Because what I can see, not only in the rest of the world, where they don't have the type of, how can I say, profile that they have within us, within the English-speaking world, because we've been part of their culture, we've been their allies. Now, even within our world, there are people questioning it. But in the rest of the world, I think the rest of the world has got a little bit sick of America throwing its weight around.
Well, I mean, to sort of draw upon you mentioned proxies. I mean, let's take the Balkans and Macedonia in particular. This is my sort of area of interest. The US has used quite effectively, right-wing Albanian neo-Nazi extremists in Macedonia, which it imposed upon the country through a 2001 war, which began uh, as a as an attempt to sort of take territory and create a greater Albania. And then when that didn't sort of work, or when that sort of strategy sort of forestalled, and the so-called Albanian insurgents were having trouble in doing that, then it became overnight it was transformed into a civil rights or human rights fight for so-called more language rights for Albanians and et cetera, even though they had those rights guaranteed in Macedonia already. I mean, I've come across declassified Australian diplomatic cables from 1992 saying that claims of Albanians being denied rights in Macedonia was a red herring, for ultra Albanian nationalist demands, and also Greece, which we can't seem to avoid. Greece's sort of fingers in the pie. It was also using that as a way of as leverage against Macedonia, and blocking its recognition in the UN and EU by playing the Albanian human rights card.
Yeah.
And in the early years of Macedonian independence, the Albanian nationalist card, the US wasn't really that interested in playing it. I think what happened was in 1995 when Clinton was in power. There was a decision made that certain parts of the world would always be Russian, i.e., Serbia, and other parts in the Balkans, and other parts like say Croatia or Slovenia, etc., would be pro-Western. So it was it was time to draw a line and choose sides. And I think, if I remember correctly, Samuel Huntington in his book The Clash of Civilizations mentions this. I've forgotten the term, but he talks about fault lines. That's it, cultural, economic, and national fault lines. So he identified fault lines. So I think once Clinton, the Clinton foreign policy has a lot to answer for over what has transpired in Macedonia since 1995. I mean, from 1991 to 1995, the US basically put Macedonia on life support or holding pattern. Because its main objective was to satisfy Greece, because Greece has been the US's long-standing
Yeah,
ally in the Balkans,
yeah.
without sort of going back into sort of enormous depth in history, detail in history. But during the Greek Civil War, it was the US which funded the Greek monarchists against the Greek leftists, which included Macedonians on the leftist side, because they'd been promised autonomy and rights. So the US has always had a vested interest in Greece's long-term viability. It's had a number of bases on Greek soil. At the moment, at one stage, I think it had either 3 or 4 bases in the 70s and 80s, and then they closed some of them down, and there's now one large naval base on the island of Crete, which the US and NATO use to police the Mediterranean, which then leads me to say Bulgaria, which was a Soviet satellite, during the Cold War, and when the Cold War ended, Bulgaria aligned itself with the EU or the EC, as it was then, a European Community, and NATO, and it joined NATO. I think correct me if I'm wrong, 2004 or 2008. I've forgotten when Bulgaria joined NATO, but it's been less than 20 years, or about 20 years when they did join. So they've aligned themselves with the US. Now, in response, the US has taken advantage of that. There are 4 military bases on Bulgarian soil which are used by the US and NATO. You've also got Bulgaria's Black Sea, which is very, very strategic, especially now with the war in Ukraine. That part of the world where Bulgaria is located is strategic real estate that's worth a lot. So in any showdown between, say, Bulgaria, Greece, with Macedonia, the US and the EU and NATO, will take the side of Greece and Bulgaria rather than Macedonia.
Sasha, we said we'd do half an hour. We've done half an hour, brother.
Okay.
And next week or next time, and I hope it's ASAP,
Sure.
let's go to Macedonia. Let's
Okay.
take the road to Skopje and the Balkans, because
Definitely.
that's really what both of us are passionate about, I guess.
Absolutely.
However, I think tonight was just a little setup,
Sure.
international setup, because the same people that have bases in Greece and in Bulgaria are the ones that are really running Macedonia right now, I think.
Absolutely, yes.
So should we call it a time on this and catch up
Absolutely.
at your leisure? And I
Okay.
think 33, 34 minutes is probably the best. I like to watch Judge Napolitano, me a hardcore leftist watching a right-wing libertarian, but I like the guy. He's open-minded, open-hearted,
Sure.
well-intentioned. That's one of the things that I'm finding is happening throughout the world now, that what was once the right is waking up more to what its country is doing than the so-called liberal left of the Democratic Party and so on, which is ironic, but c'est la vie. So if you want to say something to finish, otherwise we'll catch up at your convenience.
Look, I'm looking forward to it. Definitely, absolutely.
Me too. Me
All
too.
right.
All right.
Agreed.
Well, we'll be in touch and let's do it ASAP, bro. I'm back in Melbourne tomorrow.
No worries.
So one day I'd love to catch up and we do it in live if possible.
Beautiful.
But these Zooms I'm happy to do as many as you want.
Not a problem, mate.
Thank you and see you soon.
All the best to you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.